All right, guys, let's go ahead and get started. People will start joining, and I will help with everything. I'm Kira. I'll be our moderator for today. Thank you, everyone, for joining our webinar on solving big challenges with big data with LD Salmanson and Auren Hoffman. I'd like to get started with introductions, as mentioned. Auren, if you would go first and introduce yourself and SafeGraph, that would be great.
Sure. My name's Auren Hoffman. I'm the CEO of SafeGraph. SafeGraph has data about physical places. So if you want data about that Starbucks on 555 Main Street or a Home Depot or a hospital or a gym or anything like that, that's what we sell data. And we have three types of data. We have data about where a place is and just kind of the general facts about a place. So things like store hours and category. We also have data about geometry, so like the size of a place, the square footage, et cetera. And then we have data about foot traffic. So how busy is a place? When is it busy by time of day, by time of week, et cetera? What other places are over-indexed on this place, et cetera.
Great, thanks. Over to you, LD. A short introduction and about Cherre.
Thanks. So LD, one of the founders here at Cherre. We're a data management platform. We help our clients connect large amounts of data, internal and external, to a single source of truth, and then help make it actionable to them, whatever that means, whether an API for technical users or maybe some kind of BI platform for less technical users. And when we mean connect data, that means all of our clients' internal data sets from operational systems, all the public data sets, as well as all the vendor data from our incredible partners like SafeGraph, which allows them to then pull all those different data sets together and allow them to answer questions across the board instead of something very specific about one data set.
Okay, awesome. I'd like to then turn it over now to you, Auren, to take us through SafeGraph's reopening dashboard and highlight some of the key findings that you guys have found as you've gone through pulling the data together, starting to collect data, and as it's accumulated, what kind of insights you guys have uncovered.
Sure. So
and if
first,
you could share your screen too, if you wanted to bring it all the way up.
Yeah, let me do that. So here's an overview of, hopefully you guys can see this over here. This is kind of foot traffic data. So this is just called up here, Montana. So just a high level, SafeGraph has data on on all these different places and gives a good sense of foot traffic. And then we can see how that foot traffic has happened during this time of COVID-19. If you can see Montana, so if you see over here on Montana, there are a bunch of these things are slowly kind of coming back to normal. So if you think of things even like restaurants, bars are starting to come back to normal. Supermarkets look kind of back to normal. General merchandise stores, coffee and snack bars, hotels maybe not exactly back to normal, but starting there. Movie theaters still not back to normal. So Montana is, I would say, very much close to back to normal if you look at almost all other states. If you compare that with New York State, so New York State, while there are some places that are starting to come back up, like general merchandise stores are coming back up, and we're at kind of like 76% of normal right now. Places like movie theaters, hotels, bars, restaurants, et cetera, are really not yet back to normal. So it really does depend on where they're at. Another thing that might be interesting is just to take a look at like the industry, the impact of COVID on just foot traffic by industry. And so here you can see all these different industries and how they're doing. And you can see really movie theaters are at the bottom. So there's just very little coming back to normal. This is across, all geographies, whereas kind of like supermarkets, general merchandise stores, et cetera. But even if you look at like hospitals are kind of at the 50th percentile of where they were. And it just shows that still today, like very few people are going to a hospital unless they just really have to go to a hospital. And we can do something similar by brand. So things like Home Depot are doing way better than normal. And Target is still doing way better than normal. Walmart is roughly kind of at normal. And then you can look at things like categories, and then certain regions are getting close to normal. You see like the San Francisco Bay region is really kind of still at the bottom, whereas other regions like the Dallas-Fort Worth region is coming back to normal at a faster rate.
Did you want to go into any other specific areas through the dashboard?
I think this is a good high level overview for our readers today, but we can dive in later with the questions or anything like that. So what SafeGraph has done is it created a consortium of over 4,000 members, and that's made up of scientists from nonprofits, federal government agencies, state and local governments, so almost every major city, almost every major state, and then researchers from top universities. And then they're taking this data. We gave it away free to all of these different types of non-commercial use, and they're taking this data to help figure out how to respond to COVID-19, how to get people back to work faster, how to get the economy moving faster, et cetera. And so it's been a really great to get in, daily reports for these governors, these mayors, federal agencies like the CDC, the NIH, et cetera, to be able to use that data so that they can get people either back to work quicker or also just like plan and respond to the emergency as fast as possible.
I was curious, Auren, we didn't get a chance to talk about this part, I don't think ever, but when we look at some of that, I mean, that top left chart you had a second ago across all the different geographies, kind of which industries are, kind of top or low on the reopening, for lack of a better term. Were you able to identify any anomalies in the sense that are they all acting uniformly, right? Such as the ranking between roughly the same across the different geographies, or are there certain places where certain industries are opening up a lot faster than they would in other places, or vice versa? And maybe is there anything that we can learn from that?
Well, certainly there's certain states that are opening up just way faster. And we all know that. And, as I mentioned, Montana is just opening up way faster than New York, and Montana was always opened up more than New York was opened up. But yeah, even within states, every state and every city has different rules. So even within a state, you're going to see wide, like for instance, within the state of California, you're going to see just extremely wide variation. San Francisco, where I live, is extremely closed down. Whereas other counties in the state of California are much, much more open. And so and then different counties are going to have very, very different rules. So some counties will have rules about, restaurants, and other counties will have rules about, public places or hotels or et cetera. And so that's really going to skew the numbers. A lot of it is about the local rules. And then of course you have just like how concentrated everybody is. So if you're going to have lots of people living in a city environment, that's going to be very different than when you have people who live in a more rural environment.
So if I'm going to model this out, if I'm kind of a listener and I'm thinking about how do I use this data to model out kind of the future for the different areas that I'm looking at based on past places that opened up, I should really be looking at what rules exist in the target areas I'm looking at, and how those compare to some other places with similar type rules to make an apples to apples comparison.
Yeah, and when you dive into data, you do start to see like a lot of weird things that you wouldn't, but you also see a lot of things that you would expect.
Yeah, excellent. That's helpful.
All right. You had already started to transition to the consortium, but I thought it would be great. You've given an overview. Can you guys go into detail? I know that Cherre joined the consortium as well, with some of the data that has been shared, some of the insights that people have been able to glean in this collective effort, and really at the end of it, what the value is and why something like open access to data really matters. What are the pluses, the minuses that people think about when they think about open access to data, and how this consortium, as an example, really proves that this is an important thing to have.
Well, one of the interesting things is that in the last 10 weeks, state and local governments have become way more data oriented than they were. They've grown by an order or 2 orders of magnitude among their capabilities of using data. I would say at the top of the year, most states and cities had extremely low capabilities about taking in data. Most of them didn't even have like any real core data science teams. They were using data in a very, very rudimentary way. And they realized very, very quickly that understanding data, whether it's data about the medical data about the number of cases, or data about human movement, which is what SafeGraph has, or getting other types of data that we have in our consortium, like credit card data, et cetera, is going to be the key to figuring out how to open up the economy in a very safe way to take care of your citizens. And so we're seeing a lot of them have brought in volunteer data scientists from industry. So the state of California and the city of LA, which we work extremely closely with, they brought in like top-notch data scientists from companies like Stripe and Facebook, who either left their job or took leave temporarily for a few months to go into the government to actually help out. And so they've got extremely capable people who are helping make very, very important decisions.
Yeah, so first of all, I owe you a thanks, not just us, but not just from Cherre, but everyone for pulling that group together. It's been incredible to watch. We're obviously a very small part of it. But I haven't seen, I mean, we've talked about this, you and I, that most of the big challenges that we face today as humanity require a lot of cooperation, and it requires a lot of data and people working together around connecting and interpreting that data. And it's the kind of effort that, we really didn't have the willingness to do before as a people in many places, but also we didn't really have the tools to cooperate in the ways that we have, over the last decade. So first of all, it's been pretty incredible to watch how quickly people have kind of taken the, heeded the call and joined in, and the type of people that you mentioned, who are, to those who are listening, they're not just part of this, they're very active, and it makes us all better as a society. But if you just look at the commercial aspects of it, it's actually improving the data for everyone who's involved, because you're getting a lot of very, very smart people working on connected data sets and telling you what are the insights that they're missing to solve really deep challenges that may not be relevant to your commercial use case, but well, in tertiary potentially, or maybe even secondary beforehand levels, you'll start getting some real value to that. So I think this is really incredible. But maybe I was going to ask, what are some of the things that we're really missing from right now? I mean, I know that we've talked about this separately, but maybe it's a good opportunity to also talk to some of the folks who are listening and saying, what's missing? What would allow regulators, states, local counties to make better decisions that they're missing right now, and why should folks feel comfortable sharing because they have so far, and the folks who haven't so far?
Yeah, so there are a lot of data sets that could be extremely helpful to these governments to help them. So especially financial data sets, so like credit card data sets from places like Visa or MasterCard, American Express, or even places like Stripe or Square. Those would be extremely helpful. I spent a lot of time talking to those companies, and for various reasons, all those companies decided not to share their data. The data does not have to be shared in an individual basis, and none of these governments want it on an individual basis. So it can all be aggregated, all can be shared in a very, very privacy safe way. But still, none of these companies, these companies are big and they have a lot of lawyers, and it's hard to convince them to share the data. We have been very successful in getting smaller companies, so let's say companies with under 100 million in revenue, to share data with governments. They realize like it's important to share data, and it's kind of like their duty to share if we can save lives. And that could be both directly saving lives with COVID-19, what these companies have done, and we can count to thousands and thousands of lives that have been directly saved. And then also on the back end, getting the economy moving again also saves lives. And those things are hard to count because you don't see that life saved today, but that's a life that we save 10 years from now or 20 years from now. And that's also a life that could be much better. So it is really important that we get the data into the system. We're doing our part at SafeGraph, but we've also been able to work with a lot of our friends at many, many other companies and get them to share some of their data as well.
So let's talk a little about that spend data. So presumably, for the folks who are not really, it's not obvious to them why that really matters, right? Where your data right now gives a really good picture of the type of people going to certain locations and being there and how much time they spend there and how active they are in that location. What we really want to figure out is, are they taking the next step, right? Are they buying, right? And and what are they buying? You know, and I spent more time in a Louis Vuitton store. Am I actually spending the money in the Louis Vuitton store, right? And that's part of the puzzle that's missing here. And I would add to that kind of on the hotel side, which is another place where we can assume that traffic very much correlates to people staying at a hotel, definitely. But we also have that our baseline previously included a lot of conference traffic that we have to now take out of the data set when we think about how do we analyze hotel traffic, because all of a sudden we don't have conferences, and we want to see our people actually coming up and change from month over month, and where that change is, and what type of audiences. And part of that data I feel like is also missing. Maybe companies like CoStar will be a little more helpful. I know that I don't know that we've approached them, but maybe some of that STR data on hotels, or maybe companies like AirDNA or All the Rooms might be able to help provide a little more information on the hotels. That might help the hospitality industry get a better sense of what's opening up, and maybe also help with some best practices of, if you want to open up early, here people are doing this successfully. We see consistent growth in traffic and not consistent growth, presumably, in disease. And we see that translating into revenue, and hopefully that will also help others and inform them as well.
One of the things that you just said, LD, which I thought was really interesting, is also just all this new world that we're in makes it incredibly difficult just to gather data. And so, for instance, if you think of the SafeGraph data as a narrow example, we have data about store hours, when a store is open, when a store is closed. Well, we never thought that a store might close for 2 months and then reopen. That wasn't part of what we architected before. So that was a very big engineering challenge for us, because a lot of our clients, and these are our commercial clients, not just our non-commercial clients, but a lot of our clients really needed to know, I need to know when the store is open. If you're doing a local search for restaurants near me on Bing or something like that, they need to know when a store is open, and not just like that store does exist. So these are challenges for all data companies in this world, where there's lots of things that have happened that maybe your engineers and your product team would have never anticipated, because it's kind of a Four Sigma event that you wouldn't necessarily think would happen.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I didn't think about that. I mean, I was just thinking about a baseline, but really your data architecture didn't take into consideration just the feed shutting down for 3 months, or having an erratic schedule where this week we have curfew 2 days a week, so we're going to be closed after some hour, and then next week we'll be. And how does that?
So the SafeGraph data model in the past was like, this store could be closed on Sundays, or it's open, and the Monday store hours might be different from the Tuesday store hours or something like that. And we even had scenarios where stores were open from like 9 to 3 and then closed from 3 to 6 and then open. We had all that done, but we didn't have a scenario where like a store would just go offline for 6 weeks or something, or, as you said, just takeout and no longer, and so you have and then it's also changing on a regular basis. So it's closed, then it's takeout, then it's open, then it's closed again, then it's takeout. And so you have to move at a much faster pace than you had moved before.
Those were challenges I never even thought about, but it now makes me think about all the engineering organizations that have all these manual hacks on some kind of geospatial resolution, where it will say something like, if it's this hour, it's this store, if it's this hour, it must be that store, because it's a Sunday, so it's the church, it's not the convenience store underneath. But now all that's gone. Who knows? The church could be open all week because of the shelter, and the store might be open on the weekend because it has strange hours all of a sudden.
And SafeGraph just sells facts. So SafeGraph does not. It's not a software solution. We just sell data. So it's like a CSV of data that you get. And so you can imagine we now have these like 4,000 super smart researchers that are using the SafeGraph data. They're starting to see all of our bugs very quickly. And we sell
I framed
truth.
it as making us better, but bugs
that's
is
exactly
also
right. Yeah, we sell truth. And so when we're wrong, when we say something that isn't true, which we do, obviously we can't be 100% right. And when we're wrong about something, we need to make sure that we get it better. And so a lot of what we've been doing over is really making sure we update our algorithms. And we probably did hard code things that shouldn't have been hard code, and do a whole bunch of things to rapidly. And so hopefully every single day the data is improving from the day before. And today, I'm sure the data is much better than it was a couple months ago.
And maybe if we're already on the topic, and I know I saw some question earlier about the size of the data or something along those lines. And I mean, one of the challenges that, it's not just an architectural challenge, but it's mostly a data challenge is, we are dealing with huge amounts of data and huge amounts of data changing readily. And we're not talking about really clean, nice and easy to work with data. We're working with really, really data changing very rapidly, which means you have to deal with a lot of complexity as an organization when you're working with that. How do you think about the fact that, the amount of data used today is already immense and clearly growing at a pretty massive pace, and couple with that the fact that the consumers of the data is a growing panel, right? As you mentioned, you gave one example of cities and states becoming, or counties becoming, a little more astute on how to work with data. I think that's just one of many, many great examples, of how the world is kind of going through that change very rapidly right now. So how are you thinking about that? The amount of data you're consuming, the amount of data you're going to need to consume, and how do you build for that kind of change?
Well, first, think of it from our client's perspective. So we sell data, and 5 years ago, there were very, very few number of companies and organizations that could just buy raw data and take that in and actually get an output. And most of them were like technology companies that could do that. Today, it's probably an order of magnitude more buyers that can buy that data today than could 5 years ago. And we think in the next 5 years, there'll be at least another order of magnitude of organizations and companies that can buy data in 5 years than can do today. Even if you think of it like hedge funds, today there are probably only 50 hedge funds that really buy alternative data of the 11,000 hedge funds that exist in the US. But there's probably another 250 today that are actively working on becoming much more data oriented and building these data science and machine learning teams to be able to do that. Same thing is true with retailers. Very few retailers have the capabilities still today, to bring in data. Obviously, like Amazon can do that. So if they're doing with Whole Foods or Amazon Go, they have an extremely capable team, and there are many retailers that can do it, Walmart, et cetera. But most retailers still don't have those capabilities, but almost all of them are investing in those capabilities. And over the next few years, they will be able to take in that data. And it's also easier today to do that. There's all of these great tools. So if you think of like Snowflakes or Databricks, which are two SafeGraph partners, those are amazing tools that really didn't exist a few years ago. And they make it a lot easier for people to ingest data, to use data, to manipulate data. And so maybe before you had to hire like the very, very, very best engineer to be able to do that. And it might be hard for a non-technology company to hire the top engineer in the world. Maybe today you can just hire a good engineer, a solid engineer, but a solid engineer plus Databricks, solid engineer plus Snowflake really allows you to do that. And that opens up the aperture of the number of companies that can be able to take in that data and make use of it.
Yeah, no, I obviously agree. I mean, I think a few trends you mentioned, like one is just the proliferation of data, two is the proliferation of people being able to use the data, and then that also leads, not yet, but is beginning of the proliferation of tools to be able to connect between those two constituencies. And I think we've seen that a lot. I think one of the things that we're also seeing, though, is verticalization of some of that knowledge. And part of that, for example, I mean, it leads to this kind of debate that happens a lot within kind of one of the verticals that we spend a lot of time in, which is in the real estate domain. Whereas do we go to a standard, this is what we call a property, this is what we call a field, and go the full path of standardization, which is, I've seen, the closest I've seen that happen is FIX, kind of on the trading exchange. Like, it's the closest standard I've seen that works and consistently works. But in the real estate space, probably the closest I've seen is RESO, the Real Estate Standard Organization. It's really just for residential. And we took a very different approach, obviously, which is, we're never going to convince the whole world to standardize around something. Let's just prepare for a new world with endless data, and just that you're just going to have to deal with that. So clearly, we've architected more of those lines, and the Snowflake and Databricks are both great companies. We work with similar partners, and I think that we're just going to see a lot more of that. And that means more people who up until now couldn't make use of data or connected data will be able to make more use of it, which means presumably we're going to have a lot better decision making across the board, whether it's in the public domain sector or the commercial sector.
That's right. And if you think about if you've ever shopped for a home, well, what you might be shopping for might be different from what I'm shopping for. You might care about the number of bathrooms. I might care about the number of bedrooms. You might care about the crime score. I might care about the schools. You might care about right. So there's just so many different pieces of data, and everyone is going to weight those pieces of data differently. They're going to evaluate them differently, et cetera. And so the more you can bring in, sometimes more is not better. But if you have the capabilities to be able to process that data and slice and dice the data in different ways, and then also relay the data to each other, then bring in those different types of fields allow you to make a much more robust set of decisions.
I think it also kind of ties into this. I think there's this expectation growing. We see it among our clients a lot, but I think it's also, I hear this a lot, which is there's this growing expectation of clients of this kind of magic of, solve the problem for me. Don't just give me all the data and contextualize it. Give me the answer, right? And I think the answer is almost like a false narrative, because let's think about financial services world. You and I can both look at Apple. We can have all the same information and still have different opinions about where it's going. That's a legitimate discussion. So long as we're not arguing about where it was yesterday, and so long as, when we look at the data, we can agree factually on what we're looking at, then more of that is always good because we're going to make better decisions. But the fallacy, I think, that a lot of people get down to is that it's going to lead inevitably to the same decision. And I think that's the exciting part, is that it doesn't lead to the same decision, that all this data is going to lead to a lot more diversity of good decision and less diversity of bad decision. That's a good thing overall.
That's right. Yeah. So our motto at SafeGraph is that we predict the past. So our goal is to have actually truth, like this fact happened, but we don't predict the future. We let our clients then take that data, and they often are using that data to predict the future. They might try to predict the Apple stock price or something like that. But it's important to know what the Apple stock price was on, February 11th, 1997. That should be a fact of what that stock price was. What the stock price is going to be February 11th, 2027, we don't know.
Guys, I'm going to take a quick question of the audience before I go back to Cherre, because I think it's a relevant one about which are some of the verticals or sub-verticals that are adopting faster. So I'll answer on our end, then I'll hand it off to Auren. We see maybe a little broader kind of group of data sets and of clients, so maybe a little broader kind of view as well. So I would say that within the insurance and banking industries, there's typically more structured organizations designed to buy data. There's a task at hand, there are data sets that they need to buy to fill it, and there's an operation to make that happen. There's budgets allocated, and that's a lot easier. In hedge funds, there's kind of maybe a bifurcated process. There's ones where you have literally giant teams of data scouts and testing teams, and there's a whole process around that. Some of the big quant funds are good examples of that. I never name a hedge fund because you always get in trouble there, but there's some really good examples of that. And then you have hedge funds which are, maybe fundamental driven, maybe event driven slightly, but even in that case, they're not trying data sets every day. And in those worlds, you have to really kind of go through an ad hoc process to get them on board. To Auren's point earlier, the biggest adopters of the data sets are the other technology firms who are disrupting some of these. Disrupting is a big word, but challenging maybe some of these traditional industries, right? So think about companies like Open Door, maybe in a real estate environment, right? Or think about a new healthcare company like Lemonade, right? Or again, are these completely ingenuitive models, right? I'm not the venture capitalist giving my opinion. That's not the point of this, but those are the folks who are a lot more likely to try new data sets and implement them and be able to make and weaponize them really into something that's worth a lot. Auren, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think we sell like you to a very broad set of customers, but we also can qualify them out pretty quickly. So usually the first step is usually in our sales process, we'll talk to somebody, and then we can figure out, okay, are they at the point where they're data oriented? Have they bought data before? Do they know how to use data? Do they have processes to use data internally? Do they have either some sort of data science team or some sort of machine learning team to be able to take that data and make use of it? Or do they really need an application? And SafeGraph's not an application. And so many of SafeGraph clients are applications. And so we might refer them to one of SafeGraph clients to be able to use that data, to be able to benefit from that data, or SafeGraph's partners. And so it really just depends, but you would be surprised. Sometimes it's very hard to know until you actually have a conversation. You might think a company is super data oriented, but they're not. I actually talked to one of them, one of the biggest financial firms recently, and they didn't even have a data science team in the whole organization. So they knew they needed one, and so they're just not going to be a buyer. They've never bought any type of data before. But then, we have some kind of mid-market gasoline stations, and they happen to have just a couple of really smart data science people. You only need one who's just super smart, and could have even hired that person by accident or whatever it might be. And they can get really excited about that data, and they could start using that data and making use of the data. So you don't always need a whole team of like 100 people. As long as you have like one very excited person to be able to take in that data and make decisions from that data, you can actually bring in that data and use it.
That makes a lot of sense.
All right. I mean, you both have done a great job carrying a conversation and answering most of the questions that I had. I think to close out on the consortium, I was wondering if you both, since you're both part of it, could give a specific example of maybe a particular use case or insight that was surprising to you that came out of the consortium. Be it maybe there was some way that data was used, or maybe somebody shared something based on the shared data that surprised you.
Well, I'll go first. One of the things is, I guess it's not so surprising because a lot of people are talking about it, but you can use the data to prove it, is how much Americans are delaying medical care. And how that's probably not good for Americans. I'm sure some medical care is not needed, but most of it is. And it is important to do things that are both preventable and also if you're ailing or really hurt, you have a bad hip or something like that, it is important to get that checked out. And then it's also, and then on the flip side, how devastating that is to the healthcare providers. These healthcare providers, a lot of them are going to be filing for bankruptcy. If they haven't already filed for bankruptcy, their revenues have kind of fallen off a cliff. And a lot of healthcare providers are, in some cases, they're the number one employer in their community, especially in small towns around America. They're often the number one private employer. And it's really devastating these communities as well. So really trying to like dive in and understanding that data. I think we all kind of know that. We've heard the stories, but the data actually tells its own story. And it's as bad as we would have thought.
Yeah, I don't think anything surprising either. I think the most surprising part is the fact that so many people were willing to kind of come together and see how we can help and how we can share data with mostly research and policymakers to try and make better decisions. I think the one thing that I'm still surprised is how slow things are opening up in places where it is opening up fast. One of the things that I predicted is we just see a massive flood of people just wanting to get out of home for whatever reason, because you've just been cooped up for so many months on end. And I think part of the civil unrest that we see over the last few, I would say, weeks as a result of kind of civil rights protests, I think a big part of folks who would ordinarily might have gone shopping or spending their time outside doing something that in their mind would be more constructive socially and spending time there. So I think we're seeing maybe some folks who would have gone shopping otherwise spending time fighting for things that they think are important. And I think that if and when we see some kind of legal action around that might create some kind of resolution or some kind of what some might call progress, hopefully a lot, maybe that would also spark up a lot of consumerism afterwards as well. So I'm interested in seeing that.
Okay. I think that is the main meat of the conversation. I think it would be great to just highlight for people who are on the line what the story is of Cherre and SafeGraph better together. What is it that the two companies bring? And really not so much a sales pitch, but like what is the outcome of having the power of a company like Cherre working with a company like SafeGraph? Either?
I'm happy to kick that off. I mean, our clients who are diverse are always looking for more diverse insight, right? To be able to make smarter decisions. And we've come to the point where whatever data they have, they've kind of maximized whatever value is there. And they're looking for more and more data sets to bring in. And being able to answer today where people are in the world, how that's changing over time, what types of points of interest are being frequented and where they are in the spatial environment are very important, right? So, for example, our insurance clients, am I next to a pawn shop in a giant area where the crime, rate is otherwise really, really low? That's a very interesting point. It might change the risk profile of that area, right? Or am I in a place which is frequented by a lot of people right next door? Does that increase or reduce the risk of my property? It can go both ways, right? Are I in areas that are going to have that I need a camera, or am I in an area that already has some type of coverage by bank or other types of POIs that might be in that area? So there are a lot of different types of use cases that are only exciting to some of our clients because they can connect certain things together. And that's why this is very exciting to us, because we know that this is a data set that they need a lot. Obviously, we see that from the work, but it's also exciting because the insight that you can derive is a lot more exciting, especially in days like this, right? Because now we can start answering, okay, certain places opened up before others. What happened, right? Did prices go up? How did that affect office prices for commercial leases, right? How did that affect sales for MLSs? Again, I'm a lot of focus on our world, right? How did that affect insurance policies? Did risks go up or go down, right? Did the fact that nobody frequented some of these POIs change the risk profile? Were there more people breaking into my homes or less, right? And we had a lot of experiments going on right now, whether we like it or not. And all those experiments are treasure troves of data. And if we can go back to all these little experiments that happen, we'll call it accidentally for lack of a better term, we can now go back and learn from all these, quote unquote accidents and see what can we learn from that. And there are already a lot of interesting learnings about what places opened up and why, and what places are more likely to open up in the future, and why AMC is in a really bad place right now.
I think if you think of like what data, there's really four things that are really important in data in general. So the first, and not in any particular order, the first one is that the data needs to be true. And sometimes people actually forget that's kind of the cardinal rule of data, is that it actually needs to be true, and doing everything possible that it needs to be true. The second is that you want it to be comprehensive. So if you only know the data on one place, that might not be that interesting. So you want that data to be fairly comprehensive to be able to use it. The third thing, and this is where Cherre comes in, is that the data needs to be connected. So data just with one data source can be very helpful, but when you start to bring in 3, 4, 5, 6 data sources and merge them together and link them together, now you can ask much more deep and interesting questions about the type of data. And then the fourth thing is that the data has to be usable. So you want to be able to bring that data into some sort of environment as a company that you're used to. And so maybe you're used to using Cherre, or, again, we talked about Snowflake or these other types of things where you can bring that data in and be able to use that. So this is where SafeGraph plus Cherre can be a very, very powerful capability for many, many folks.
Great. So let's go into some of the questions. I think we addressed the scalability and the big data size question. I think just from a clarity standpoint, someone would like to know more about how SafeGraph collects data from everywhere. If you could provide just, I guess, a little bit more context around that, that would be great.
Sure. So today, SafeGraph has about 14,000 data sources that it gets its data from. We get a lot of our data by crawling. So we'll crawl the Starbucks website, or also crawl the city of Chicago and get data from there. We buy a lot of data. We also get foot traffic data from mobile applications, and then that data is completely anonymized. And so we have a lot of different types of sources that come into the different pieces of data. The hard part is when you have data from all these different sources is making sure that you're doing a really good merge. So if you think of that specific Starbucks on 555 Main Street, that might be in 20 of our 14,000 sources. And we really want to make sure we're matching all 20 out of 20 and not 15 out of 20, but also not 25 out of 20. And that's probably the thing that we focus on most at SafeGraph is matching. My last company at LiveRamp was maybe the best company about matching people. And when we started SafeGraph, we wanted to be the best company at matching a place so that we can actually do that. And I know Cherre actually does something similar.
Yeah, and also maybe into another one of the questions there. So Cherre is a platform as a service, right? So our job is to connect lots of data feeds for our clients into one, right? So our clients are building applications or have data science teams or are building models, and they just want to build or just analyze or just explore their data, right? They don't want to deal with how do I take all this giant world of data from my internal applications, which could be, Salesforce or, a very dedicated real estate, system like Yardi or MRI, and then, a world of partner data sets, right? So maybe I'll get foot traffic from SafeGraph, and maybe I'll get weather patterns from, the weather company, and maybe I'll get, lease data from Comstack, different types of partners of ours. And then you also want to connect all the public data, right? The deeds, the mortgages, and taxes. And that's what Cherre does, right? So Cherre takes all those data sets that you have that you're either subscribed to already or from your internal domain or that you want to buy through us or through our partners and delivers that back to you in a single API, database, UI, whatever it is that you need in that case. So that's our job is to be that connection layer, and we basically charge a platform fee. So we're designed for, again, similar to SafeGraph, we're designed for more technical type of clients, for our infrastructure types, and for clients who are looking for an application, we can talk about things like business intelligence type applications, things like that.
Great. I was going to suggest that question next. I think this would be an interesting question about how things might change. So one of the people asks or says, your data set for social distancing metrics has gotten a lot of attention. In this data set, you define a home as a modal geohash 7 at night over a 6-week period. Correct if that's wrong. However, upon analysis, this title is quite big and can include venues in an area where people might be outside. Have you thought about how your results could change if you identified homes at a more granular level?
I'm not totally sure about the question. So we do, in general, we do, that's probably the least granular that we'll define a home, but we usually do define a home as like a specific polygon. So a specific small thing, and we'll try to understand that someone is at home during that time. Home is always hard, especially in the current thing, is a lot of people have moved to different places, or they're on vacation sometimes in the pre-COVID world. And so you do want to understand, like, you don't want to overcount a visit. So that's really the core thing, is when someone's sleeping, you don't want to overcount a visit. So you don't want to, sometimes they might be sleeping above a Starbucks or something. And you don't want to assume that they're at the Starbucks when they're there. The other thing to do at home is just to understand, like, where people from census block groups are going. And so you want to have a sense of just generally where somebody lives. So if you're going to do like a histogram of visitors to a Walmart from different census block groups, you can attribute that well. And you can't do it perfectly. So there are definitely some folks where it becomes very, very difficult to determine where home is, or there are some people who are basically in a different place every single night. Or they might have like 8 homes or something. Think of some super billionaire or something like that. Those outliers are going to be harder to put at a place, and sometimes we'll throw out those outliers to smooth out the data.
Yeah, that's how. And I was just going to add to that to the person who asked the question, right? Think about the polygons that we're talking about, right? There's a polygon for the parcel, right? That's the tax lot, right? Then there's polygons for maybe a building or some kind of structure. And think about a campus might have multiple buildings on one very large parcel, right? And then now you're starting to think about verticality. And a lot of our systems are designed to tell you it's this point on the map. It's not always designed to tell you what's the elevation of that point. And now to the example before, is the information talking about the apartment, you know, having more occupancy because maybe the kids are at home, and we're used to that baseline of having one person there, you know, now all of a sudden there's three, or is that two people who went to visit the Starbucks, and do we even know if the Starbucks is open or not, right? So all those complexities today become instead of architecture challenges, they become core data integrity challenges. So it's
Yeah,
not
absolutely.
an easy challenge across the board. It's a hard one for all the companies in the space, us included, of course.
Okay, I think we're at the wrap of time. I think if you guys just would quickly to close out, let people know, aside from cherre.com and safegraph.com, where they might be able to learn more or connect with you guys directly, if you have a preference like LinkedIn, things like that, and then we'll close out.
Sure. Obviously, they can go to safegraph.com, or they go to our doc site, docs.safegraph.com. We have all of our information there, all of our fill rates, all of our data. And then we even actually every month write all of our bugs from the previous month. So we try to be as transparent as possible of all the things that we had wrong in the past as well. And someone can connect with SafeGraph as well on Twitter at SafeGraph. They can connect with me at Auren, AUREN. So feel free to connect with me and interact with me in any way. And I promise to reply to you on Twitter if you do ask me a question there.
That's awesome. Same, usually Twitter is the easiest way to get me to respond. Otherwise, website's very good. Again, pretty much everything we do and all our documentation is there, and pretty easy to get in touch with our team. If you are looking to do stuff more on the research side, and you're less in the commercial world and you're trying to figure out, you know, stuff that are interesting around there, feel free to reach out directly, try and see if there's a good fit to work with you. Alternatively, if you're building something, you're an early stage startup and kind of getting off the ground, know that you can talk to us as well, right? Clearly, most of our clients are large enterprise, but we do have a program for startups. So if you're a small company getting off the ground, talk to us. Sometimes we can work with you as well.
All right. Thank you both. And thank you everyone for joining. We'll be sending out the recording probably tomorrow, as well as some follow-up materials like our links and things like that. Thank you, Auren, and thank you, LD, for your time today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Have a good one, everyone.
Bye.